Joined this morning by Craig Stobo, Professional Director and Business Advisor, diplomat, commercial businessman, Chairman of Wind Farms New Zealand, taumata of the Otago University Business School. Craig joins us this afternoon. Craig, thanks for holding on, mate. Nice to have you on.
Good afternoon, how are you?
Good. And we've got a better connection this week.
Yeah, I'm sorry about last week. Apologise to listeners.
That's all right. Can I just bring everybody up to date from where we were from last week? So if you didn't hear Craig last week, where we are. Craig was talking last week about the New Zealand Emissions Trading Scheme, which is New Zealand's primary ability to handle, our policy when it comes to meeting our international obligations related to climate change and greenhouse gas emissions and the like. Now, Craig, you explained to us last week that there is an auction every quarter at which you buy, emissions trading credits. Is that right? And that is the primary way in which the government gets enough money to pay people either in New Zealand or offshore for the good stuff they've done by getting money from the people who are discharging those greenhouse gas emissions, and they're paying for it. Have I got that roughly right?
Correct.
Oh, gosh, I don't usually do that, especially with complex stuff. So, Craig, what happened yesterday? Because I haven't seen any media on this.
There's some media this morning, can't recall the exact source, but the primary information comes off the NZX, etc. website on this. So the auction failed to clear yesterday, which is the second time this has happened this year on a quarterly basis. There were 17 participants and 110 bids for units, emissions units, and nothing cleared. The secondary market price the day beforehand was about $57 a unit. I was explaining to your listeners last week that this auction is incredibly important for those who are selling units into the scheme, such as foresters and those who need to buy them because they are emitting CO2 and are required to buy those units and surrender them to the government. So the primary mechanism for pricing carbon is failing. And when you combine that with my concerns over our obligations under the Paris Agreement to get our gross emissions down by 2030 by 20%, by 30%, or a lower number on a net basis. And the Treasury has opined in the budget that the costs of that material, which is a impost on taxpayers to purchase foreign carbon credits to offset our own gross emissions, that and the industrial allocation system, we're in trouble. Our primary mechanism for pricing carbon is not working, and largely that stems from dumping of units in the market late last year, despite advice from the Climate Change Commission. We have a system that's lost confidence of its participants.
Means what? That if you can't buy and sell credits because this is your primary mechanism to limit gashouse or greenhouse emissions in New Zealand, what next?
Well, I haven't seen any reaction from ministers or from the Ministry for the Environment, but they must be concerned and are resolving to solve this in ways that brings confidence back. You recall the price path suggested by the Climate Change Commission and the Productivity Commission is much higher than $57. It's variously $150 and above. As I said last week, there is concern among politicians that a rising carbon path, which provides a pricing mechanism for people to alter their behaviour when they face energy costs, is an added concern around the just transition to a green economy. But in layman's language, it's a higher cost added to the existing cost of living issues. So I want to hear a resolution from ministers and from the Ministry for the Environment that gets the auction system back up and running again.
Okay, just take me back, Craig. $57, is it a tonne of carbon emitted? Is that correct?
$57 per tonne of CO2, that's right.
Yeah. So, and that is what the government say I should be paying to buy a unit. So that's, if you like, the cost imposed upon me if I'm emitting carbon, correct?
That's correct. Inside the scheme, that's right. You're a member of the scheme, that's what you pay to purchase your unit.
Right. And the Climate Change Commissioner and the Parliamentary Environment Commissioner and those are saying it should be about 3 times that price because that's the...
Productivity Commission and Climate Change Commission, that's right.
Productivity Commission. Be about 3 times that price because that more reflects the obligations, the real cost of that to the New Zealand economy and our obligations under the Paris Accord. Is that correct?
Well, that was their pathways to get to net zero. So there's 5-year reduction plans, a series of steps, a series of 5-year steps, and this is the pathway that they've suggested. The secondary market keeps trading all the time, but the auction yesterday failed. So there's a lack of confidence in where that auction price should be, and we need to get to the bottom of why that's happening.
Well, why do you think it's happening?
Well, I think it's a confidence issue around the behaviour of the Crown, which, despite Climate Change Commission advice, issued more units late last year, which confuses people about where they will issue units, at what point and how much. And when you have someone controlling the price and quantity of a good, it's very difficult for consumers or investors to understand where prices should be.
Okay. For me personally, who has no intention of entering any of these auctions, and really this is happening at a level that's far above my pay grade and my intellect, so just for Joe Blow, what is the practical consequence of A, these carbon credits being traded on this scheme, and B, the auction failing?
Yeah, so there are those who want to sell units into the scheme, such as foresters who have got plantations, which is an issue for rural communities, I know. But it's part of this progression towards net zero that we've signed up to under the Paris Agreement. And other jurisdictions have carbon taxes and other ways of trying to encourage behaviour to change. We've chosen an emissions trading scheme using a market mechanism. But unless the prices slowly move up as they should do to get to net zero, behaviour at the pump or in those that use energy won't change. And so as a country, we get to 2030 and find that under the Paris Agreement, we haven't reduced our gross emissions by 30%, lower number on a net basis. We, as a group of taxpayers, are going to have to buy overseas credits, which will cost us billions of dollars.
So I see.
The point is, if the private sector isn't encouraged to change, the pricing behaviour doesn't alter our behaviour to shift our use of energy from fossil fuels, for example. We'll leave methane out for the moment, but fossil fuels to renewables, then we're all in trouble.
Right.
Like billions of dollars. So we need to work on this.
Okay.
Given that we've signed up for Paris.
So we've signed up for Paris, and this has obligated us to do all the things that you've just described then, with some pretty traumatic consequences if we don't. And you've just outlined those as well. Can I say, is it an option for us just to say, well, we're going to fail. Sorry about that. We'll try a bit better next year.
Yeah, so there are various differences and agreements around the world. So India's signed up for net zero by 2070, right? So
did you say 2070?
2070. So India's different. So every country's come up with this from different ways.
Yeah.
We have an unusual emissions profile in that 50% of our emissions are agricultural methane, so CH4 in chemical language terms. It's only about 11% or so in other countries. So we're very different. Now, last week or so, the National Party has put out their emissions policy for the electorate to listen to, and one of their suggestions is to segregate CO2 and CH4. So
that's methane, isn't it?
Carbon dioxide and methane.
Yeah, so it's methane and CH4, yeah?
Methane and carbon dioxide, that's right. And they're saying there should be a two-gas regime. Methane shouldn't be in the emissions trading regime. At the moment, the Labor government is suggesting that 10% of methane should be in the scheme by 2025 2025 or 2030, I think it is, I beg your pardon. And National's saying let's postpone that for 5 years and rediscover or rethink the pricing mechanism, which the government primary industry relationship organisation has also been advocating. Hey, Waka Eka Noa has been saying the same thing. So we are now seeing, and I'm not going to say backsliding because we haven't been able to solve it in the current environment, but there's a clear push to have two different sets of rules for different gas emissions. Agriculture is really difficult because there is a natural law that I'm sure those in the rural areas may know much better than listeners from urban areas, but a ruminant or a cow it's kind of like a natural law. That is that cattle, when they have a kilogram of food, animal food, it produces 21 grams of methane, and that's like a constant. So the only way we can reduce methane emissions is focusing on that mechanism of transmission or reducing the kilograms of food going into an animal. So it's got an issue for the National Party policies because they're suggesting technology solutions to try and solve this. But I'm just saying it's incredibly difficult to alter that, call it natural law, between animal feed in and methane mainly through the mouth out, which is why the farming community is seeking ideas and solutions to assist, because food security is one of those issues in the Paris Agreement. That's an exception. So we have to be able to produce food.
And isn't that one of the reasons why lots of countries around the world exempt agriculture from their emissions schemes and accords?
I don't have enough knowledge of other schemes, but they certainly don't have the same ETS as we do. They have different ways of taxing and different rules. Exactly right. So we're all slightly different. Our big issue is a big part of our emissions profile is methane, which is, as you know, is a potent, short-lived gas and has different characteristics to CO2. So we need the science, we need technology people to help solve this through our farming community, right, so that we still get to our emissions profile promises to Paris.
Which is why National's made a big deal in the last week or so about trying to get new technology to produce, particularly around genetic modification as well, and GE crops to produce grass that doesn't produce as much methane in a cow, basically.
Yeah, I think it's regardless of the type of animal food, it's the quantity. So a kilogram of feed, regardless of the type, leads to 21 grams of methane. So the science is going to have to help try and change that equation somehow.
Right, okay. We don't have the answer to those yet. Listen, thank you for that, because I've got a Labour MP, Ingrid Leary, on tomorrow, so I'll be interested to ask her what the response of the government is to that, because you're right, I haven't seen anything from David Parker at all. And if the primary mechanism by which the government is trying to control this issue is failing, they need to come up with a solution pretty quick, one would assume, because when's the next auction's in 3 months' time, I take it?
Correct. That's right. That's the primary. That's the auction. The secondary market keeps trading in the background, but yes, we're not going to get a satisfactory outcome unless we resolve this. So we need to understand why this is failing and get a regulatory or a response, a market response.
I'm really glad I had this conversation with you, because that's something I've never been able to understand until these conversations. So thank you for that, Craig. Now, second issue, can I just move on just quickly, because you're deeply steeped in New Zealand commerce. You are, after all, widely regarded as a leading business personality, and you are, as I said, the taumata, for Pete's sake, of the Otago University's Business School. The GDP figures have just come out. They aren't the 0.1, so it's sort of we're technically in recession after 2 terms. What's the practical effects of being technically in recession?
Well, it's kind of a statistical line in the sand. It follows a negative 0.7, so on an annual basis, we're still up close to 3%. And so technically we're in recession, but only just. It's more a question, does that profile fit what policymakers had been thinking through the course of their policy rollout? So that includes the Treasury. with their half-year update and then their budget and then obviously the Reserve Bank. So I don't think the numbers today are going to upset either of those profiles. It's still a question of, is the policy settings today fit for the future? And as the statisticians note, we have got a huge surge in migration, which is 70-odd thousand people net coming through in the last 12 months. We're still unsure of the impact of that, as well as the recovery from the cyclones and other weather events. So the GDP numbers today indicate, those issues are important in terms of what that outlook looks like. So is our monetary policy setting okay given that number? Yes. Is the Treasury policy outcomes that they were profiling in the budget going to be altered because of this? No. So the question still is, are inflation expectations too high? Is the economy relatively still too strong going forward, given the interest rate settings? So those things are still live, but nothing really changes in terms of policy settings from today's outcome. It's not a surprise.
Okay, which leads then to the next question. It's 4 months until the election, so we'll have another quarter coming out presumably a month before the election, which may or may not be salient. We've had 70, you mentioned those immigration figures, Craig. Do those immigration figures actually artificially, or do they, in real terms, sustain the growth of New Zealand economy? In other words, if there wasn't 70,000 net migrants into this country over the last 12 months, would our economy contracted further?
Well, I would have thought so. They bring capital and knowledge and skills. They provide labour to improve bottlenecks. They spend money, they rent, they buy houses. So ultimately that have an impact.
So there is a vested interest, if you're the government, with 4 months to go to the election, not to do anything to control those migrant numbers.
Yeah, it's just the second round impacts of that, isn't it? So what's the impact of that on housing, infrastructure? Does it resolve those bottlenecks? Managers of businesses able to find the workers with the right skills they need to deliver outcomes. Auckland Transport has 300 more drivers, so the buses get back into the proper timetable. All those things happen, so you get some gains from things happening that were prevented because of our lockdowns and closed borders. So from a business perspective, if they've got the right skills, it's a welcome development to ease some of these supply side shortages.
4 months to go until the election, because none of these things are immune from their political setting, of course. They all have now implications upon us. I guess more in terms of public perception and confidence than anything else, which, as you know, those are the drivers for what you do when you're in the polling booth. How do you expect the New Zealand economy from a commercial point of view to evolve over the next 4 months? Worse, better, about the same?
Well, I was looking at the business confidence numbers that came through the last couple of months, and business confidence, the ANZ business confidence numbers have recovered slightly in May. Activity levels, employment, investment, exports are probably still problematic issues. The NZ Institute of Economic Research quarterly survey of business opinion, net 61% of businesses expect a deterioration in the operating environment. So businesses are still in a tough spot, given pressures on margins, labour and, inflation, trying to control inflationary costs in their businesses. So when I hear Christopher Luxon kind of discussing his views on, business people being very negative, wet, whiny, inward-looking as a country, I can understand some of that from a business survey perspective, but business people tend to be people who take risks, build businesses, and have to have an optimistic framework to be able to build, grow, and service their clients. So we're an export-oriented economy. We need to produce great goods and services and export to the world. So if we're stuck in a whiny negative spot and he's picking that up, it's not particularly optimistic, is it, for the next 3 to 4 months for the business community.
How much is the business? But how much is the business
Sorry?
community affected by the fact that a change of government might have come? I'm assuming that your average business person, not all, but the predominant, wouldn't mind a change of government to a national act because it would be more in accord with perhaps their ideology or their economic views. Do you think that a change of government would have that effect upon the business community, Craig?
Yes, and to answer the question of the policies that the combined group, if its national act comes in and does. So the IMF has just been through recently and published their report on New Zealand yesterday, and they're saying that our policy stance should retain a restrictive bias. Government tax expenditure policy should prioritise floods and cyclone recovery, but limit other discretionary spending. So if you're going to get the accounts back in balance and continue to focus on debt reduction without raising taxes, you're going to have to make some pretty smart decisions on expenditure. So depends really what they do after the election, doesn't it? If they get in, how they're going to manage this country so that we get our current account much closer to balance instead of being a country that is spending more than it earns, which is our current situation with about 8.5% current account deficit. We are living beyond our means, and that can't be sustainable. Otherwise, the debt capital markets, Standard & Poor's credit rating agency, we're starting asking some serious questions about why people should be investing in our economy.
And finally, mate, somebody's just said to me, Pete says, would wind farms benefit from having higher priced carbon credits?
If there's a higher cost of energy through carbon, absolutely, because that encourages a move towards renewable energy away from fossil fuels. Absolutely. And that was something I spoke about last week as chairperson of NZ Wind Farms. We are a renewable wind producer looking to invest further in renewables and wind renewables on our site. And that's positive or based on a shift to a low carbon economy. So yes, we will be a beneficiary of higher prices for fossil fuels, unquestionably. But
your problem is getting access through the Resource Management Act and it's maybe its successor to do that kind of investment, yeah?
Well, we got the fast track consent process ticked off by the Minister, and through that process, which took us 21 months, why you would ever go back to slow track or RMA2 or whatever it's called, why you'd ever do that is beyond me. As a country, we seem to put in place these roadblocks to enable investment to occur, to get the outcomes that our society is looking for. I just find it very difficult to operate in an environment that prevents logical investment in opportunities that have benefits for our society.
Are you replacing wind farms, those windmill types? Are you the ones that are replacing the 2-blade with the 3-blade and they're bigger?
Correct.
Is that yeah?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Going to more efficient, bigger megawatt per hour output turbines. That's absolutely correct.
So is that because there's been improvements in technology and science and engineering, and that's how you can do that? So would you be sort of upgrading every 5 or 10 years because the technology is improving?
Yeah, definitely an upgrade to better technology, more efficient. They are smaller footprint but larger in height, actually quieter machines. They have a life, though, design life of, say, 25 years, so we wouldn't be replacing them every 5 years, but you're right, they have a terminal life as equipment unless maintained properly. So yes, but we are looking to go to a much more efficient, productive machine. That's correct.
And you're currently arrayed across the Palmerston North Skyline, yeah?
Yes, we're one of the sites on there. It's not just us, there are other wind producers up there too.
Where else are you, Craig?
We're just a single site at
right.
the moment, so we're unusual in that sense, so highly specialised, focused on wind energy.
There is a movement to put something offshore of New Plymouth, I think, about 40 kilometres in the sea. Is that, I mean, I don't know if you're involved in that, but Are those the kind of energy producing or production machines that we can expect to see in the future? Offshore wind farms as well?
Yes, so it's in the Taranaki Bight. A lot of interest domestically and offshore in the quality of that wind resource off the Taranaki coast. It requires all sorts of consents, again, to be assessed by local and central government, but they're very common in overseas jurisdictions off the north coast of Scotland, off Denmark, which I visited in 2019. Different quality of water. It's much rougher in the Tasman, but the wind resource is outstanding. So you're going to need very specialised equipment, and these are large machines on anchored or floating platforms yet to be decided. So exciting in some senses, but incredibly challenging from a capital expenditure and site perspective.
Yeah, well, I don't anticipate anything other. Craig, thank you very much for your explanation. It's always clear and concise, and introducing us to a relatively complex area which is going to have such an impact upon our daily lives. I thank you for that.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everyone.
Good night. Thanks, Craig. That's Craig Stobo. Listen, probably he would be one of New Zealand's leading business people, quite frankly, and his pedigree, his background is, to be honest with you, I'm delighted that he's on the show.